American West, Camas Creek Valley, Idaho, 1891. He is splitting wood the way a man splits wood when he is not angry and not in a hurry. Clean through the center, not too hard. The axe does the work if you let it. The log falls in 2 equal halves on the chopping block, and he sets the next one up without pausing, the way you set up the next one when this is not a task for you but a fact, like breathing, like checking the fence line in the morning. October in the Camas Creek Valley. The aspens on the ridge have gone yellow 2 days ago, all of them, overnight, the way they do in Idaho when the season decides it is done. The sky behind them is the blue that has no name in most languages, but that every person who has ever lived in the Mountain West knows in their chest. He is not splitting wood for himself. His woodpile is full, has been full since August. He stacked it in August because he has time in August and does not have time in October, and planning is the only kind of wisdom he has ever fully trusted. He is splitting wood for the property to the west. He does not look at that property while he works, but he knows the size of the stack against its south wall, because he has been measuring it without intending to for the past 3 weeks. It is not enough. The man's name was August Wren. He had come to the Camas Creek Valley in 1873 and had been there 18 years, which was long enough that the valley had stopped thinking of him as someone who came from somewhere and started thinking of him as simply part of the landscape, like the basalt ridge to the north and the creek that ran clear through September and went quiet under ice in December. He was 53 years old. He had 140 acres, a small cattle operation of 63 head, a barn he had built twice. The first one came down in the wind of 1878, and he built the second one to different specifications, and it had not come down since, and a house that had been built for a family that did not materialize. His wife, Ellen, had left in 1882. Not left. That word implies a destination, implies choice in the way people use the word choice to mean something that happened cleanly. Ellen had become ill in the fall of 1882, the slow kind, the kind that takes the better part of 2 years to finish, and she had finished in March of 1884. She had been 38 years old. She had not complained once in 2 years, and she had not pretended once either, which was the particular grace of her that August was still, 7 years later, trying to understand how to carry without dropping. He had no children. He had his 63 head and his good barn, and his neighbor to the east, a man named Silas Dodd, who was 61, and who came over for coffee on Sunday mornings, and who did not talk much and did not expect August to talk much either, which was the only kind of companionship August had learned to accept without cost. And he had his neighbor to the west. He had been trying not to think about his neighbor to the west for approximately 6 years. She had come to the Camas Creek Valley in 1885, the year after Ellen died, which August had noted with a specific discomfort he could not locate the source of and had decided not to examine. She had come from Oregon, from a town near Portland, with a wagon and a mule and a daughter who was 11 years old, and who had her mother's eyes and her mother's way of looking at things directly without being rude about it. The daughter's name was Iris. She was 17 now, and spent half the year in Boise learning to be a school teacher, which Clara had arranged through a correspondence with the Boise School Board that had taken 8 months, and which Clara had conducted the way she conducted most things, with specific language and no apologetics. Clara Voss was 46 years old. She ran a kitchen garden that was better organized than most commercial operations August had ever seen, kept 12 laying hens with the same quiet attention she gave everything, and had, in 6 years, turned 60 acres of marginal Idaho land into something that produced more than it had any mathematical right to. She did not ask for help. This was the thing about Clara Voss that August had measured, from a careful and respectful distance, for 6 years. She did not ask for help. She fixed her own fence. She managed her own roofing. She had hired out to a man named Garrett Luce for the harvest in 87 and 88, and then had bought a second-hand reaper and managed it herself in 89 and had not needed Garrett Luce since. She did not ask for help, so August did not offer it. He just watched the woodpile. For 3 weeks he watched the woodpile, and on the 4th morning of October 1891, he loaded his axe and his splitting wedge into the wagon and drove the half-mile west without particular announcement. Nellis. She was in the kitchen garden when he pulled up, pulling the last squash before the ground hardened, the way you do it when you know exactly how much time you have and do not waste any of it. She looked up. He said, "Your woodpile." She looked at him. He said, "It's short." She said, "I know." He said, "I've got an afternoon." She looked at him for a moment with the expression she wore when she was deciding something. Not suspicious, not grateful yet either, just deciding. She said, "There's wood to split in the barn." He nodded. He went to the barn. She went back to the squash. He spent 4 hours at her chopping block. He worked the way he worked at his own, clean through the center, the axe doing the work, no wasted motion. He stacked what he split against the south wall the way he would have stacked his own. Bark up, gap at the bottom for airflow, ends flush. She did not come to check on him. This was the thing he noticed. She did not come out to supervise or to make conversation or to offer coffee as a signal that she wanted him to stop. She was working. He was working. These were two parallel facts that happened to be occurring on the same property. At 4 o'clock, she appeared at the barn door with a tin cup. She set it on the fence post nearest to him. She went back inside. He finished the wood. He drank the coffee when it was cool enough. He stacked the axe and the wedge in the wagon. He knocked on the door. She opened it. He said, "That'll hold you through December." She said, "I know." He said, "February if you're careful." She said, "I'm careful." He said, "I'll come back in November." She looked at him. He did not look away. She said, "All right." He drove home. He did not know what all right meant. He knew what he hoped it meant. He was 53 years old, and he had not let himself hope something like this since before Ellen got sick, which was a long time to go without practicing, and he was aware, driving home in the October light, that he had perhaps forgotten how. No, and you don't. He came back in November, as he had said he would. The wood situation was manageable by then. She had sourced 2 cords from a man in Fairfield, but there were other things. The gate hinge on the chicken run was wrong and causing the gate to drag. The rope on the barn pulley had frayed in a way that would fail within the month. A section of the kitchen garden fence had heaved in the first freeze. He did not bring any of this up. He brought firewood, a cord of what he had extra, and he was unloading it when he saw the gate dragging, and he fixed the gate hinge while he was there, because he had the tools and it needed doing. She watched him from the porch. She said, "You didn't have to." He said, "Gate was dragging." She said, "I was going to get to it." He said, "I know." He finished the hinge. He went back to the wood. She said, "Coffee." It was not a question. He came inside. The kitchen was the kind of kitchen that tells you something about who runs it. Organized not for appearance but for function, with the particular intelligence of someone who uses a space 10,000 times and has figured out where everything should be. Books on the window ledge. A list on the counter in handwriting that was precise and economical. A photograph on the shelf. A man, younger, not recognizable, that August looked at once and looked away from. She poured 2 cups. She sat. He sat. They talked about the winter projection. What the creek had done in October was always a signal for what December would do. They talked about the Fairfield market and whether the beef prices would hold. They talked about Iris, who had sent a letter from Boise that Clara read parts of aloud in the matter-of-fact way of a woman who is proud of her daughter and does not need to announce that she is proud. They did not talk about the photograph. He drove home at dusk. He did not know the man in the photograph. He knew he did not need to know, but he thought about it. The particular weight of a photograph in a room, what it is still doing there, what it says about the person who leaves it there. He thought about Ellen's photograph, which was on his own shelf, in his own kitchen. He thought about how a room can hold more than one true thing at a time. He was not sure when he had learned that. He was fairly certain he had not known it at 30. December came. He came with it, or near it, the 3rd Saturday of the month. The rope on the barn pulley had not failed yet, but was going to. He brought a replacement length and spent an hour on it while Clara was inside baking. The smell of it coming out through the kitchen window and landing on him in the cold with the particular unreasonable effect that warm smells have in cold air. When he came inside, there was bread on the table and 2 cups of coffee and a plate of something he could not name, but which was made with apples and sugar and which she set in front of him without asking and without making an event of it. He ate it. He said, "This is—" He stopped. She waited. He said, "What is this?" She said, "Old family recipe, from my grandmother. I make it in December." He said, "What did your grandmother call it?" She said, "She called it trouble, mostly, because everyone asked for more, and she only made it once a year." He looked at the plate. He said, "She wasn't wrong." Clara almost smiled. It was brief. She went back to her cup. This was the first time August had heard her make a joke. Not a performed joke, a genuine one, the dry kind that arrives without announcement and expects nothing from you. He thought about it on the way home. The specific sound of a person who has been alone long enough to have forgotten that they are funny and has just been slightly surprised to find out they still are. He thought about that for 3 days. Humbled enough, Beaumonts, January. The creek froze on the 14th, 12 below on the 15th. This was not unusual for the Camas Creek Valley, but it was not comfortable either, and the particular arithmetic of a small cattle operation in hard cold is the arithmetic of a person who cannot afford to lose an animal to the weather and who knows it every morning. He managed his 63 head. He spent 3 days on the south pasture fence where the ground had heaved. He came home each evening with the specific exhaustion of sustained outdoor work in sustained cold, which is different from the exhaustion of other things, and which requires at a minimum hot food and a reason to take your boots off. On the 19th, Silas Dodd came over for Sunday coffee and sat at the kitchen table with his large hands around the cup and said, after a long silence that was comfortable because Silas's silences always were, "You've been to the Voss place." August said, "A few times." Silas said, August said, "The woodpile was short." Silas said, August said, "Silas?" Silas said, "I didn't say anything." August said, "You said twice." Silas thought about this. He said, "That's true, I did." August said, "She's a good neighbor." Silas said, "I know she is. I've known that for 6 years." He drank his coffee. He said, "I'm wondering when you figured it out." He did not say this unkindly. Silas Dodd was not an unkind man. He was an honest one, which in the Camas Creek Valley was generally considered to be a virtue even when it was uncomfortable. August looked at his cup. He did not answer. He did not have to. Silas Dodd had been coming for Sunday coffee since 1876 and had learned over 15 years that August's silences had as many registers as speech, and that this particular one meant, "I know, I am working on it," meant February. He came to fix the kitchen garden fence. This required no explanation. The fence needed fixing. He had the tools. The ground had softened enough at the base that the posts could be reset. She watched him from the kitchen window for a while. Then she came out. She was wearing her work coat, a heavy dark canvas coat that had seen better days but was clearly doing the work it was built for. And she had gloves on, and she had the post digger. She said, "East section." He said, "I've got it." She said, "It goes faster with 2." He said, "Yes." She went to the east section. They worked through the fence in 2 hours. She worked the way he worked, efficient, unhurried, no wasted motion. She knew her own fence. She knew which posts were gone and which ones could be reset, and she did not ask him to make these determinations for her. At the post nearest the corner, she said, without looking up from the hole she was digging, "You've been coming around since October." He said, "The woodpile was short." She said, "It was." She said, "It's not short anymore." He said, "No." She kept digging. He kept digging. She said, "So." He said, "So." She looked up. He looked at her. February air between them, cold and very clear. She said, "Are you going to say something, or are you going to keep fixing things in silence until the spring thaw changes your mind?" He said, "I was going to say something in March." She said, "It's the 20th of February." He said, 10 days isn't much." She said, "In this valley in winter, 10 days is plenty of time for a person to change their mind about something they haven't made up yet." He said, "I haven't changed my mind." She looked at him with the expression that she had when she was deciding something, the same one from October, the same one she had worn when he said the woodpile was short, and she said she knew. She said, "Then say it." He set down the post digger. He said, "I'd like to keep coming around." She said, "To fix things." He said, "Among other things." She said, August. He said, Clara. She almost smiled. The same almost smile from December. She said, my husband has been dead for 11 years. He said, I know. She said, his name was Thomas. He was a good man. He died of a horse accident in Oregon in 1880 and left me with Iris, who was 6 years old, and 60 acres that were mostly rock. He said, I know. She said, I came here because there was nothing left there. He said, I know that too. She said, I'm not in the habit of relying on people. He said, I know. She said, you know a great deal. He said, I've been watching for 6 years. Wodemonthine, Idaho winter, her breath visible in the cold air. She said, you could have said something 6 years ago. He said, you had just arrived. You were… He stopped. He looked at the post in his hand. You didn't look like you wanted anyone to say anything. She was quiet for a moment. She said, I didn't. He said, I know. She said, what changed? He said, the woodpile. She looked at him. He said, I watched the woodpile for 3 weeks, and I couldn't stop watching it, and I knew, when I couldn't stop, that I had already decided. I was just working up to it. She was quiet, the kind of quiet that has something moving in it. She said, 3 weeks. He said, I'm thorough. She said, you are. She looked at the fence. She looked at the post in her hand. She looked at the February field, pale, cold, the last of the snow in the shadowed places, the bare soil of the garden showing through where it had cleared. She said, where were you 20 years ago? He looked at her. She was not crying. She was not performing. She said it the way she said most things, directly, with the dry humor that arrived without announcement. But there was something behind it, the specific weight of a question that is funny and not funny at the same time. 20 years ago, she had been 26 years old in Oregon, with a good husband and a daughter, and no reason to wonder about Idaho. 20 years ago, he had been 33 years old and married to Ellen, and not yet the man that losing Ellen would make him. 20 years ago, neither of them was who they were now. He said, I was somewhere else. She said, so was I. He said, we got here. She looked at him. He said, didn't we? A long moment. She said, yes. She looked at the fence. Help me with this corner post. He helped her with the corner post. They finished the fence. They went inside for coffee. March, Iris came home from Boise. She was 17 years old and had her mother's eyes and her mother's way of looking at things directly without being rude about it. She had also acquired, in 6 months in Boise, a specific clarity about her own opinions that was new and that Clara received with the particular combination of pride and weariness that a mother feels when her child has been becoming more themselves in a place she could not watch. Iris arrived on a Tuesday. By Wednesday evening, she had assessed the situation with the thoroughness of a 17-year-old who has grown up watching her mother manage everything alone and has opinions about what changes around here. She said, at supper, without particular preamble, Mr. Wren has been coming around. Clara said, he has. Iris said, fixing things. Clara said, among other things. Iris looked at her mother. She said, among what other things? Clara said, Iris. Iris said, Mama. They looked at each other the way a mother and a daughter look at each other when they have been each other's primary company for 11 years and have long since run out of the ability to pretend. Clara said, he's a good man. Iris said, I know he is. Clara said, he's been a good neighbor. Iris said, I know that too. Clara said, you have an opinion. Iris was quiet for a moment. She was 17 and had her mother's deliberateness with words. She said, I have a worry. Clara waited. Iris said, you've been alone a long time. Clara said, I know. Iris said, and I'm going to be in Boise. Clara said, I know that too. Iris said, I don't want you to… She stopped. She looked at the table. I don't want someone to take advantage of that. Clara looked at her daughter. She said, Iris, do you think August Wren spent 4 months fixing things on this property to take advantage of me? Iris said, no. Clara said, then what do you think? Iris said, I think he spent 4 months fixing things because he didn't know how else to say what he wanted to say. Clara said, yes. Iris said, and what did he say? Clara said, that he'd like to keep coming around. Iris said, "That's not very much." Clara said, "No, it's exactly enough." Iris said, "He makes you different." Clara said, "What do you mean?" Iris said, "When he was here in December and you made grandmother's recipe, you laughed." Clara said, "I'm sure I've laughed before." Iris said, "Not like that." Clara was quiet. She said, "He said something funny." Iris said, "You said something funny. He just made it possible." Iris looked at the photograph on the shelf. She said, "Papa would have liked him." Clara said, "I think so too." Iris said, "How do you know?" Clara said, "Because your father liked men who did things without talking about them, and August Wren has been doing things without talking about them for 6 years." Iris was quiet for a long moment. She said, "All right." She said it the way her mother said most things, directly, having arrived at a conclusion and seeing no reason to decorate it. She said, "Invite him to Sunday dinner." Clara said, "You want to assess him." Iris said, "I want to eat a meal with someone my mother laughs around." Clara said, "That's a kind thing to say." Iris said, "I'm occasionally kind." Clara said, "You're more than occasionally kind." Iris said, "Don't make an event of it." Sunday dinner was roast chicken and potatoes and the bread that Clara made on weekends and that Iris ate 3 pieces of because she had been in Boise for 6 months eating institutional food and had returned with a specific hunger for her mother's kitchen. August came at noon. He brought a jar of honey from his hive, which he set on the table without explanation because it did not require one. Iris assessed him. She did this with the same directness she brought to most things, not rudely, but completely. She asked him about his cattle operation. He answered specifically. She asked him about the creek, whether it had changed since the drought of '89. He told her about the creek in the way of someone who had watched it closely for 18 years and found it consistently interesting. She asked him about the barn he had built twice. He said, "The first one I built for the weather I expected. The second one I built for the weather I got." Iris said, "What's the difference?" He said, "About 14 feet and a stronger ridge beam." She said, "Did you build the second one differently because you knew more or because the first one fell down?" He said, "Both. Usually it takes both." She looked at him. She said, "That's a good answer." He said, "It's an honest one." She said, "Those are the same thing." He said, "Usually." After dinner, Iris went outside to look at the chicken run, which she had not seen since December and which had acquired the new gate hinge. She examined it with the same thoroughness she examined everything. Clara and August sat at the table, the plates between them, the honey jar on the table. Clara said, "She likes you." He said, "I can't tell." Clara said, "That's how you know." He said, "Clara." She said, "August." He said, "I've been thinking about what to say since February." She said, "It's April." He said, "I know, I'm thorough." She almost smiled. He said, "I would like to court you, properly." He stopped. He looked at the honey jar. I know what I am. I know how old I am and what this place is and what the winters are like, and that I am not an easy man in the way that some men are easy." He looked at her. "But I would like to try." She looked at him. She said, "You fixed my gate." He said, "The gate was dragging." She said, "You fixed my barn pulley." He said, "The rope was fraying." She said, "You spent 4 months fixing things that were mine to fix." He said, "Yes." She said, "And if I asked you why, what would you say?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I would say that I drove past your woodpile every day for 3 weeks and I could not stop looking at it. And I could not stop looking at it because I could not stop thinking about who was going to be cold in February if it ran short." He paused, and that seemed like important information about what I was feeling. Clara said, "August." He said, "Yes." She said, "You could have said this in October." He said, "You're right." She said, "Or November." He said, "You're right." She said, "Or December." January, February, March. He said, "All of those are correct." She said, "Where were you 20 years ago?" He said, "Somewhere else." She said, "That's what you said in February." He said, "It's still true in April." She looked at her hands. She looked at the photograph on the shelf. Thomas, Young, Oregon, 1878. She looked back at August. She said, "I am going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it fully before you respond." He said, "All right." She said, "I came to this valley in 1885 because I had no reason to be anywhere. I did not come here to find anything. I came here because the land was available and the price was right, and Iris needed somewhere that was not Oregon, and I needed the same thing." She paused. "I have built something here. I have built it by myself, and I am not modest about that, and I would not give it up, and I would not diminish it, and I would not let anyone treat it as a thing that needs to be managed by someone else." He said, "I know." She said, "I am telling you because I want you to understand what yes means when I say it." He said, "And what does it mean?" She said, "It means I will still fix my own fence." He said, "I know." She said, "It means Iris comes first." He said, "She should." She said, "It means I will not pretend that Thomas didn't exist." He said, "Ellen is on my shelf too." She said, "Yes." She said it the way she said most things, directly, without ceremony. Having decided and seeing no reason to announce the decision in any language other than the word itself. He said, "Yes." She said, "You didn't ask the question yet." He said, "The question was in October. You just answered it." She looked at him. He was almost smiling. The first time she had seen that, the almost smile, brief, real, gone quickly. The expression of a man who keeps most of what he feels in a place that is not his face. She said, "That's either very patient or very presumptuous." He said, "I've been told I'm thorough." She said, "You've told yourself that." He said, "It's still true." Outside, Iris was still at the chicken run, which needed less examination than she was giving it, but she was giving it everything she had. Clara said, "Sunday dinners." He said, "Yes." She said, "You'll come for Sunday dinners." He said, "I will." She said, "And we'll see." He said, "We will." She picked up her coffee cup. He picked up his. Outside, Iris decided the chicken run had been examined sufficiently and came inside. She looked at the table. She looked at the honey jar. She looked at August, and then at her mother, and then back at August. She sat down. She said, "Is there more bread?" Clara said, "There is." Iris said, "Good." She got the bread. They sat at the table, the three of them, in the April light, and no one said anything that needed to be said because everything that needed to be said had been said, and what remained was the ordinary business of an afternoon, which was its own kind of answer. They were married in September at the Camas Creek Church, which had stood since 1879, and which held the marriages and the funerals of everyone in the valley with equal practical grace. Silas Dodd stood on one side. Iris stood on the other. Iris had come home from Boise specifically for this, which she did not call coming home for this, but which it was, and she stood beside her mother with the specific composure of a 17-year-old who has decided that composure is what the occasion requires, and who is managing it in the way she managed most things, directly, with occasional difficulty. When it was over, Silas Dodd shook August's hand. He said, "I thought October was a little slow." August said, "I was thorough." Silas said, "You were slow." August said, "Both." Silas almost laughed. For Silas Dodd, this was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The two properties, August's 140 acres and Clara's 60, were not combined. This had been discussed and decided, and the decision had been practical and clear. They were neighboring properties with neighboring people. The fence between them stayed. The gate between them stayed. The gate between them was, August noted with private satisfaction, well hinged. Clara kept her 60 acres. August kept his. They managed them as separate operations that shared labor when labor was needed, and shared Sunday dinners always, and shared the particular knowledge that comes from two people who have each built something and found, in the building, that they are more useful to each other than to themselves. Iris came home in December and in the summers. She finished her school teacher training in Boise in 1892 and came back to the Camas Creek Valley, not to stay. She had taken a position in a school in Haley, but close enough. Close enough that she came for Sunday dinners when she could, and that in 1894 she brought a young man named Peter Brand to Sunday dinner, and August assessed him with the same thoroughness Iris had applied to August in March of 1891, and found the assessment satisfactory. He did not say this out loud. He said, "That fence post on the south side is leaning." Peter Brand looked at the post. He said, "I can fix that." August said, "After dinner." Peter said, "Of course." August looked at Clara. Clara looked at August. Neither of them said anything, but Clara made grandmother's recipe for dessert that evening, which was a signal that August had learned to read, and which meant, "We are keeping this one." The woodpile never ran short, not because August kept filling it, though he did, every October, because planning is the only kind of wisdom he had ever fully trusted, but because Clara, who had been managing her own woodpile for 6 years, had also learned from watching August that August's woodpile was always full in August, and had adjusted her own schedule accordingly. She did not tell him she had done this. He noticed in the second year. He said, "Your woodpile." She said, "What about it?" He said, "It's full." She said, "I know." He said, "You stacked it in August." She said, "I had time in August." He said, "That's—" He stopped. She said, "What?" He said, "That's what I do." She said, "I know." She said, "You're not the only thorough person in this valley." He looked at her. She was almost smiling. He said, "No, I suppose not." He was right. She was not. What had Samad Puethivor watched the woodpile for 3 weeks before he did anything about it? That is the part I keep coming back to. 3 weeks. 53 years old, and he spent 3 weeks measuring something that was not his to measure, and finally he admitted, not to himself, he had known for a while, but finally he admitted out loud, to his axe and his splitting wedge and his wagon, that he had already decided. He was just working up to it. I think about how many things in life are like that. The decision has been made, the knowing is there, and we spend weeks, sometimes years, doing the arithmetic of our own fear, trying to find a number that makes the risk small enough to take. He just picked up the axe. He drove half a mile west. He said, "Your woodpile is short." And she said, "I know." And that was the whole of it. 20 years, different places, different losses, different lives that turned out to be the preparation. And then October, in Idaho, and a woodpile that was short, and a man who had finally stopped pretending he wasn't watching. Where were you 20 years ago? Somewhere else. So was I. We got here, didn't we? Take care of yourselves out there. Find the woodpile you can't stop measuring. You probably already know what it means. Until next time.